Hey everyone, I'm going to be studying with you today. I am in the MCAT Biology Review book by Kaplan, and I'll be going through each chapter, section by section. Again, today we're in the MCAT Biology Review book by Kaplan, and I'm starting with the introduction and 1-1, which is cell theory. Hope you'll listen along with me. Okay, so the introduction talks about how the human body contains approximately 37 trillion cells. These cells create tissues from which organs form. Each cell serves a purpose, communicating and carrying out the reactions that make life possible. It's really cool because bacteria actually outnumber eukaryotic cells in our bodies about 10-1. So for every one eukaryotic cell, there's about 10 bacteria. And as we'll learn later in the chapter, bacteria are prokaryotes. All right, so moving right along, the MCAT requires an understanding of how each cell structure carries out its functions and affects the entire organism. So in order to understand the human organism as a whole and how the human body reacts to various pathogens, a thorough understanding of cell biology is required. Moving right into 1-1, cell theory. Prior to the 1600s, organisms were perceived as being complete and inseparable into little smaller parts. But this was due in part to the inability to see smaller structures optically. In 1665, a scientist by the name of Robert Hooke assembled a crude compound microscope and tested its properties on a piece of cork. He noticed a honeycomb-like structure and compared the spaces within the cork to the small rooms of a monastery, known as cells. But because cork consists of desiccated non-living cells, Hooke wasn't able to see nuclei, organelles, or cell membranes. So just remember that date, 1665, and Hooke. He saw the first cells, which were not living, of course, through a crude compound microscope that he assembled. Another date to remember in this early history of cell biology is 1674. Anton van Leeuwenhoek was the first person to view a living cell under a microscope. So unlike Hooke, he viewed a living cell. Another date to remember is 1850, which was 2 centuries later. Rudolf Virchow demonstrated that diseased cells could arise from normal cells in normal tissues. Next, the original form of the cell theory consists of 3 basic tenets. So cell theory actually has 4 tenets altogether, but we're going to start with the original form of the original 3 tenets. First, all living things are composed of cells. Second, the cell is the basic functional unit of life. Third, cells arise only from pre-existing cells. So again, number 1, all living things are composed of cells. Number 2, cells are the basic functional unit of life. And number 3, cells arise from pre-existing cells. Through advances in molecular biology, a 4th tenet was added to the theory. This 4th tenet is cells carry genetic information in the form of DNA, which is deoxyribonucleic acid, and they pass this DNA or genetic material on from a parent cell to a daughter cell. Cell theory has created an interesting dilemma with respect to viruses. Viruses are smaller structures that contain genetic material, but they're unable to reproduce on their own. Since this violates the 3rd and 4th tenets of cell theory, because virions can only replicate by invading other organisms, and because they may contain ribonucleic acid, viruses are not considered living organisms. We'll discuss viruses later in the chapter. All right, that's the introduction and 1-1. Thanks for listening.